On January 7th, 2020, I was at home from college on winter break with my family when the news broke. Neil Peart, drummer of Rush, dead from brain cancer. It was the first time that a celebrity that meant anything significant to me died, so I got to experience that for the first time. Obviously, it was the last headline I expected to see, especially one that concerns the single primary influence on my decently musical life, by far. So how did I feel when reading this news? Not sad, notably. I mean, not sad mentally, at least. When I think back to that moment, I realized the way that I talked about the news to my parents was almost in a way that I would talk about any other celebrity dying. Something closer to, oh, Neil Peart of Rush died, instead of Neil Peart, the main inspiration of my musical life thus far for over 10 years, which you know very well about, is just gone. I had sort of mentally accepted that Rush was done as a band well before he died, so when the news came, I already knew that the book was closed, so to speak. Rush was part of my life for a while, and then they were not. But now they're back. Rush, for the first time in over a decade, is touring again, or they're just about to start, depending on when this video releases. So now, they're back in my life. And this time, it is totally different.
I'm one of probably tens of thousands of drummers around the world who has Neil Peart as their favorite drummer. He was the first of about 3 or 4 middle to senior-aged reclusive white guys that have been at the center of my hyperfixations and media interests throughout my life. I was probably around 10 years old when my dad introduced me to Rush. First albums I heard of theirs were the Gold compilation, the Snakes and Arrows Tour live album, and of course Moving Pictures. By this point, I already knew I would be drumming for the rest of my life, and the entire band's technical prowess, attention to detail, and live show production was perfect for me, an aspiring musician that already had an affinity for audiovisual media and performance art. I quickly made Rush pretty much my entire life.
My friends gave me the subtitle, The Kid That Likes Rush. And I don't think other bands really have people that can be designated like that. Sometimes it felt like I was called that in the same way that people would say, like, oh, that's the anime kid over there. And most of the time I think they were explicitly nice about it. I think their intentions were good. I hope.
Either way, I was listening to their music all of the time and saw them live on their 2010, 2012, and 2015 tours. And it was amazing. I have yet to have a concert experience that tops those gigs. Rush also helped develop my artistic tastes, especially when their 2012 album Clockwork Angels released and I was sucked into the steampunk and futuristic geometry aesthetic that accompanied it. And like all things I enjoyed when I was little, I found some way to replicate it. I made the Clockwork Angels clock in my driveway out of chalk. The chalk clock. Here's a picture of it with my dog. Here's a cool picture I took of some clock parts when I was getting all artsy aesthetic with this new camera that I had. Here's the symbols and stuff wood burned into a walking stick. I made a walking stick. And of course, I'm drumming throughout all of this. 7/4-time signature became as natural to me as 4/4-time signature was. I love to sneak that cheeky ride pattern that Neil does in YYZ and Spirit of Radio into covers of other songs that I perform with my cover band.
This is all to say, Rush is clearly in my bones. It has been that way for almost 2 decades, and many other fans several decades longer. It's always fun when I find another fan of Rush that also sees them as something special, whether it be someone who saw them on the Grace Under Pressure tour in 1980, or someone that was not even a figment of the imagination when that tour was happening, like myself. I also feel like there aren't a lot of relatively casual Rush fans. If you're a Rush fan, you're probably a super fan in some way, shape, or form. So this begs the question, why didn't I feel like there was such a huge blow when Neil Peart passed away? There was no seismic shift in my perspective. I didn't carry grief like I thought that I might. It wasn't like there was a world before Neil Peart's passing and a world after Neil Peart's passing. Part of it is because I was very clear with myself that at the end of the day, I did not know him. And I guess when it comes to celebrities I follow, I never have much of a drive to really assign a personal, emotional attachment to them. Even though I was obviously impressed with what he accomplished and loved everything that he unknowingly showed me about what the drumming world could be, I also understood pretty well that I didn't really see myself as wanting to be like a capital B, big, capital F fan of his. Like, my friends in high school knew that he was a musical role model for me, and they also knew that I didn't really follow any other drummers. Like, I didn't really know any other drummers for other bands. But it wasn't like I was singing his praises unprompted.
The other part of the dynamic is that this was Neil Peart specifically. He was notably a private individual that opted out of public appearances, and I guess I learned early on enough that it would never seem right to try to seek him out and act as though we shared any sort of kinship with each other if we were to ever meet in real life. People like my dad have asked me about what I would do if I saw him in the bakery that we went to, and I had to actively think about how it would probably be the respectful thing to just let him be and just enjoy that he was in my life from a distance. You know, I can't pretend a stranger is a long-awaited friend. But the bigger thing was that Rush was considered finished for almost 5 years when 2020 rolled around. The Rush world knew that their 2015 40th anniversary tour was their last hurrah. As soon as Neil crossed the plane after Working Man and came out for a group hug at their last gig at the Forum in Los Angeles, we knew that they were done. Even if Getty did say that they did hope to see us again sometime. It was a closing out of 40-plus years of a constant of 3 elite and good-natured, chill musicians, Getty, Alex, and Neil, playing together, no falling outs, virtually no changes in lineup, and always at the top of their game. For all intents and purposes, they retired having led a completely successful musician's life. No bad blood at the end, or unfortunate news that permanently broke them apart. They closed the book about as perfectly as you can imagine. So Rush was done, and their physical bodies would inevitably be done as well at some point, and it just so happened that death took Neil first. Not much left to do but look at the new versions of their album art with the 40th anniversary album re-releases, and wonder what that Rush brand beer tastes like.
And since seeing them on the 40th anniversary tour, right during finals of my senior year in high school, I noticed that I had slowly stopped listening to Rush on the regular, as my life shifted to getting ready to go to college and picking up new interests, both inside and outside of music. They started to fade into the background. Never completely gone, I'd go back and listen to their songs every so often, though most of my music listening time from then on has been exploring instead the electronic music scene. Rush also would crop up every so often as needed, like when I first went off to college and I wasn't immediately expected to attend church anymore. I found out about this word called atheism and learned about that, and I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. That's what free will was about. Okay, cool. How can I apply this to my own life and how I see myself and my faith? And now that I'm in a cover band, there's definitely some renewed interest for me in covering some of their songs as well. But other than things like that, Rush became something that I definitively carried with me, to be sure, from my past upbringing, and was now able to identify as, this is a thing that I used to be a lot more interested in. Like, it's always part of my blood, but it's not part of my day-to-day. Life goes on. Which is why it's so surprising that they're touring again.
Made a decision to go back on tour.
Hi, we're going back on tour. So we'll see you soon.
I think this news has impacted me way more than the news of Neil's passing did, just because of how much history has preceded this moment. Both the history of the band, but also just my personal history in relation to the band. What is it like for Rush to be back in my life again when I thought the book was closed for good? What does it mean to revisit something that formed so much of my upbringing, influencing my musical ventures and my art and just how I see the world? What does it mean for my past to suddenly return, and will it be different this time? To me, Rush is
Not exactly the most formative creative force of my upbringing, but in a couple ways it really did matter to me. Croc Legend of the Gobbos was the first video game I ever played. Technically, I played the sequel, Croc 2, first. They had it on these computer stations at my school's before-school program, and I could only play one level at a time, and I begged my parents to get these games for me so I could play them at home, and I played them a lot. The janky tank controls from the first game are just hard-coded into the muscle memory of my hands. And like all hyperfixations to come, I expressed my love for Croc through fan art, years before I had the internet access to learn about that term for the first time. I definitely made a deck of cards at one point, and also my mom made me an entire Croc costume as well as a set of real stuffed animal Gobbos. Best mom ever, I love you so much. Far and away one of the defining interests of my early childhood. Now, Croc doesn't have the same cultural capital as other media that I've been influenced by, despite being primarily known as a Yoshi game that didn't make it to the Yoshi part. It's just two dinky games that came out in the late 90s that did sell well, and a lot of people sort of remember them, but I don't think it ever had a proper spot in the limelight. And when I grew up, I'd still play them every so often. I'd see if friends that I made ever had heard of the games before, but other than that, I didn't really have a reason to revisit them in any capacity.
with the exception of the soundtrack, which I listen to frequently for background music, even still after all these years, because it is that good. And looking back on them now, regardless of how much I love these games, I wouldn't step up and call them good in any objective sense. My game designer friends aren't too impressed with them on a technical level. The games don't really serve that much for me right now besides nostalgia purposes, and I'm fine with seeing past nostalgia to evaluate something with a more critical eye without necessarily losing enjoyment along the way. So Croc ended up turning into this meme, parentheses lovingly, between myself and my friends. The idea of Croc that I had growing up where this was the coolest game ever, it's over. And now it's like the little joke that I trot out at every viewing party for Nintendo Directs or Sony or Xbox showcases. Maybe this time, maybe today, Croc will finally get its remaster announced. It will finally get its moment in the spotlight, the Croc remaster, something that everybody's totally been waiting for. I mean, obviously this is sarcastic, but what gets me is that there are YouTubers like Video Game Donkey, for example, who have poked at Croc also in the past. They are doing the same meme that I'm doing, and they are never going to acknowledge its true greatness.
Things that he's referencing: Geico, 15% Geico, yada yada yada. Sbarro, what is this? Some kind of commercial? It's an advertisement?
But then, August 2024, Croc Remaster is announced. For real. The meme is real. My friend sent me an article for this when it was first announced, and I had to stop and assess for a couple minutes because I was like, this is actually real. It's actually happening. I had to get my bearings. Immediately I was on board, if only to see what exactly comes of this. This could actually be something. Maybe. I don't know what to expect from this long dead development company, Argonaut Software. What's going to happen here?
Turns out it's nothing more than a reskin. Probably AI upscaling, goopy textures, increased frame rate. Some of the levels don't even work properly in some places, but the cherry on top is this treasure trove of extra promotional and behind-the-scenes material that they let players explore. I think this is where most of the time was spent for the remaster. From what I've read about the game's original development, the true soul of Croc seems to be split between just insane marketing and merchandising and music making. The soundtrack is the best thing about Croc. So I was happy to actually revisit this, albeit from a distance, as I haven't played the remaster myself and I don't plan to. But I've seen bits and pieces of it, and this new context just gives me a whole other sense of appreciation. I had thought that Croc was done, that its book was closed, and it would remain as this, inspiring, nostalgic, but otherwise just goofy little game from my childhood. And instead I got to experience it in this new light and look at this little story arc that it went on, from being nostalgia to this little shit meme that I trotted out every so often, and then actually coming back and getting a remaster, at least in some capacity, surprising me one last time. Also, Donkey made the Croc video. Thank you, Donkey. Appreciate it. All other things considered, I think it's a pretty good story for a game that I otherwise have always earnestly expected to get a proper remaster or a remake. And it happened to be just my luck that Kirby Air Ride was also the first video game I ever played on console. To give you a brief idea of how wrapped up in this game I was, at one point I recreated all of the game's racing machines out of sculpting dough, and I would race them downstairs in my basement on courses built out of markers and Lincoln logs and similar things. And I would also take them outside to the forest behind my house and do the same thing, building courses out of leaves and fallen branches and the like. I do not really understand why the idea of a Kirby racing game never took off among the broader gaming public. Almost none of my friends throughout childhood had ever heard of it when I brought it up, despite it being literally, again, a Kirby game. It's Kirby. Everyone knows Kirby. Maybe racing games were just not paid attention to as much back in 2003. Perhaps they were considered more disposable no matter what property it was. Oh, Double Dash came out the same year. I see. Okay, obviously when it comes to video game history, I do not know what I'm talking about. But what I do know for sure is that this was an interest that I would explore to the fullest extent possible. Not for forever, because eventually I went to high school and then to college after that, and during that time I spent less time on the console and more time on the computer. So my beloved Kirby Air Ride, along with other titles that I shared similar levels of adoration for, like Super Mario's Sunshine and Galaxy, were more or less kind of left behind in my childhood. Though, with Kirby specifically, I always felt that it deserved, however possible this could have been, to have a remaster of some sorts. Not just because it was my personal favorite out of all of these, but because I think I knew that it could have always been something much more than it was. Even my child-sized brain sort of realized that the concept in the time and space that it was given always felt very restricted or limited. This wonderful concept that you have of these type of mini-games inside this game, it could be pushed so much farther. I don't know how, but maybe it could be. Throughout college, I learned about the phenomenon that was the game's director, Masahiro Sakurai, by way of hopping on board the hype train for the evolution of the Super Smash Bros. Series. The barrage of tight, modern graphics and hype culture that formed around each new character's announcement further bolstered my child self's argument that Kirby Air Ride deserved a full modern remake or remaster, just to see what Sakurai and his team could do, and not be relegated to a permanent status as just a GameCube classic for future Nintendo systems. So for years, I legitimately did hope for the day that Kirby Air Ride would make a triumphant return. And the April 2025 Nintendo Direct gave us exactly what we were hoping for. For me, there was a world before this announcement happened, and there was a world after this announcement happened. Fully animated Super Smash Bros. Style trailer succeeded in the following months by not just one, but two full-length directs dedicated completely to introducing Kirby Air Riders to the world, which is the just flat-out blank check version of this game that I always hoped would be made. I still haven't played it myself yet, but from all the game footage which I've seen, which is a lot, because I'm very interested, it looks, to me, perfect. Everything is expanded on, the story mode is one of the most epic that I've seen, and the sheer craziness with which this gameplay happens makes me feel like it's jacked up on some chemical that stokes a fever dream of action and energy. This game has things in it that I can't even show you if you don't know, because they go so far above and beyond what I thought was possible for this game to do that to show it feels like spoiling the endgame, and these things don't even have anything to do with the campaign mode. I have talked at length on this channel before about how my favorite game developer has matured from making tiny games in the Flash era to breaking through on Steam. In real life, I've seen my closest friends in the art world take their work out of the constraints of what they can achieve in art school and evolve it to an entirely new level as they get their proper professional footing. Kirby Air Riders is taking a budget-sized version of a game developed by a very good developer and telling that developer, hey, in the past, you've made a journey around the Earth, we are now giving you unlimited fuel, time to explore the stars, and from everything that I've seen, it nails exactly what it was hoping to achieve.
The more I think about it, it was very difficult for me to close the book on Kirby Air Ride because I never wanted to accept that its story was truly over. And now in 2026, I can look back and see how the years have taken my experience with this really fun thing that I liked, that I had significant hopes for in the future, and infused several years of quiet waiting and just gaining knowledge of how the industry works, and finally, after so long, see my hopes and dreams
dashed on the rocks, almost certainly for good. Sometimes the things that I enjoyed growing up attempt to come back around, but it just doesn't work out. Back in the early 2000s, substitute teachers across America would wheel out the big TV on the cart and show classrooms 2 VHS tapes that were anthologies of music videos. And each video used computer-generated graphics of anthropomorphic instruments that appeared to self-play these fun, original pop-rock tunes, using very finely detailed movements that could only be developed by people with some sort of engineering background. Animusic was the type of thing I would beg my parents to let me watch on Saturday morning instead of the usual cartoons on TV. With my favorite Disney film already being established as the original Fantasia, and also being raised on ball machines in the local science museum, I was prompted to devour anything that synchronized music and video like this.
Now, having grown up just outside of the college town of Ithaca, New York, not only was I surrounded constantly by music and science and wonder at how the world moved and sounded around me, but the guys who made Animusic also were raising their kids right in the area, so I got to do playdates with the developers' kids. And because of this high amount of exposure, the roots of inspiration for my musical and aesthetic tastes ran deep, possibly even more deep and fundamental than those of my favorite rock band Rush. And I also never really stopped being in this prime Animusic fanhood, like I did with other hyperfixations of mine.
All the same, there was definitely a feeling of my inner mental machines starting up again when Animusic 3's Kickstarter was announced and carried out in 2012. I remember pledging my money and watching the campaign finish, wildly successful. Now all of us fans had to do was wait for these Cornell-educated guys to deliver the next video album full of musical delights now that they had the funds to build the infrastructure they needed to end the trilogy with a bang.
And if you were already a fan of Animusic when this video started and you've been kicking your feet because you are just so happy that somebody else on YouTube is making a video about it, this is where the kicking stops, because as we all know, Animusic 3 never came out.
The updates got more and more sparse, the team suffered health concerns, and the legacy of this really cool idea slowly started to dissolve into its own form of heat death. The last update, ironically titled Alive, was posted in August of 2015. 10 years later, in August 2025, the website's domain expired. I watched something that was near and dear to my upbringing, brought to me by a school system I was fond of and people who I considered friends, slowly turn into a story of the harsh reality that not everything works out. Accompanying that was seeing how real people who paid sometimes very good money for this project had varying reactions to the slow realization setting in. Some people were determined to make Animusic 3's failure to materialize its lasting legacy. Some people were determined to prevent exactly that from happening. Most were somewhere in the middle. No one was happy.
If the book, so to speak, were to properly reopen and Animusic 3 somehow did come out in the future, it would be, for me personally, a victory on the level of Half-Life 3 coming out. I would be so relieved, so grateful, and it would be a way that my interests poetically come around full circle. But unlike Half-Life 3, Animusic's whole idea of adding something really inspiring to the world of making computer-generated music videos for original music, it faces a different set of challenges than Half-Life 3 does in the gaming world.
It's no easy feat for something like Half-Life 3 to live up to the expectations set by an audience and a studio that expects each new installment in the series to revolutionize gaming, but they do have the means to do it. Animusic, on the other hand, did not necessarily set out to be groundbreaking in a similar way, though it did see a lot of success when it was first published. But the problem is that now in 2026, even if they wanted to, their role and capabilities, I fear, would be almost immediately flushed out. This idea of making music and controlling animations through MIDI was probably a really novel idea back in the early 2000s, but to give some perspective, Animusic 2 was released in 2005, the same year that YouTube started. Now, so many more people have the tools to do the exact same thing. Or if they don't have a soul, they could chuck it into the AI slot machines instead. I think Animusic 3 would still do really well as its own contained little thing. Someone on the subreddit suggested they use it to reintroduce the importance and virtue of physical home media, but there are so many forces at work that a team of virtually 2 people would be fighting very hard to overcome in order to stand out and be successful. This is something that a small game studio could just up and run with. Individual people are already doing it. Fan animations, known as Fanamusic, carrying the concept of Animusic past the VHS tapes, have evolved to the point where people are making animations that are right at the quality of the original tapes, more or less. As a lot of us know, it's even happened in real life a fair amount already. Music videos and live performances these days have already taken this concept of audiovisual synchronized performance and built and extrapolated it to extents far beyond what Animusic originally showed us.
Even though I've pretty much accepted that Animusic 3 will never happen, I would still love to see it in some way someday, but things in the world have changed so much that my experience of Animusic 3 simply fundamentally won't be the same as it was when I grew up with it all of those years ago.
Now, of course, Rush is not some goofy thing to me like Croc Legend of the Gobbos, where the story it's told has taken on some new meaning in its absence. It's also not something that's due to be at the peak of its innovative and creative output like Kirby Air Riders. No one expects Rush to be back and better than ever, because we know Geddy and Alex are getting pretty old, and they just want to have fun doing their music again. The idea that we're about to actually see them again sometime, in a context where they're in the epilogue of their career, so to speak, less, holy shit, it's time for Rush, and more, hey, it's Rush. This is something I'm genuinely excited about. But obviously that vision originally included Neil Peart, so by this alone the fact that it's still happening seems pretty impossible.
But I'm going to temper this, because it would be dishonest to you and also to myself if I hid the fact that I've thought, off and on, since 2020, what it might look like if Rush continued to play their music after Neil's passing, with the assumption that they would of course not include another drummer, because how could you replace Neil? I thought that, maybe Geddy and Alex might one day want to hit the road again, but maybe as like an acoustic duo, having cozier nights with the crowd, sitting in a couple chairs on stage, and reinterpreting some of the songs. So I guess it would be more accurate to say that the most surprising thing to me inside of this direct Rush experience is that they've decided to play while replacing their drummer.
I don't know who Annika Nilles is, but I do know that drummers know who she is, which is a very good sign for me. The image that I've gotten is that she is someone who fits exactly into this vibe of Rush that I've described sort of previously. Someone who is technically at the top of the game, while simultaneously being pretty laid back and just happy to be where she is, like all three of the main trio seem to be. It's also delightful that she's known as an instructor and someone who holds drum clinics. So she's naturally continuing this trend for Rush where the drummer is associated with high education and academic prowess. Maybe she'll garner a nickname if she hasn't already, similar to how Neil was known as the Professor.
So totally simple, just adding a kick and a hi-hat and that's it. And playing that a little bit to make yourself a bit more comfortable in 5.
Also, her drum kit is really cool. It's cool. I like it. That's important.
And just like that, I'm already engaging with Rush in a different way than I've had to in the past. Because obviously we've never had to have the conversation about replacing one of the members. Of course, all my friends wanted immediately to hear my opinion about what I thought about my main music inspiration being somewhat replaced. Somewhat. That conversation marked one of a string of topics that suddenly sprung up everywhere in October 25 when news of this 50-something tour was first announced. Most of the conversations I heard were not really that interesting to me. They kind of came across as like sports talk for someone who is not really interested in sports.
Question: should Rush have gone with someone more famous? How much was their choice reliant on tactically trying to respect Neil's legacy while also pleasing fans?
I don't really think it matters. They handled it privately. They agreed that Annika was the best fit. That's all I care about.
Question: what does it say that Rush now has a woman in their band?
Well, everyone made the same timeless joke about how Rush are now guaranteed to have women at their concerts, and that joke got old really quickly. There was also the sludge of people crying about Rush going woke, which is the usual pathetic tripe that fundamentally incurious losers say. I will say I am interested in the conversation to be had, and is probably already happening, about how Annika can be an inspiration to women drummers everywhere, and I do really appreciate that. There could also be interesting things to say about how Rush is typically seen as a band for older white men that wear cargo shorts and voted for Gary Johnson in 2016, and how that association might have formed without Rush themselves purposefully doing anything to create that. Complementary to that, it would be fun to talk about the fans that don't fit into that dynamic.
And admittedly, one other conversation that everyone would obviously have that I tuned into a bit, and which I hinted at previously, is the question of whether this is still Rush. I mean, this is kind of what's driving this whole video in a respect. In my Submachine Legacy review, I focused on how the Submachine games have evolved multiple times over the years, and that even though the most recent release on Steam deviates wildly from the aesthetics, themes, and even world-building logic that tells us what Submachine really is, the act of changing from one form to the other is just as fundamental to the Submachine essence as any specific observable trait. Similarly, Rush has also reinvented themselves throughout their musical career, from roots in the influence of progressive rock like King Crimson, and blues rock like Led Zeppelin, to synth-heavy tracks and new wave and pop rock influences, all the way to alternative rock and metal by the time they finished up. Rush with Geddy, Alex, and Neil isn't the same as Rush with Geddy, Alex, and Annika. And technically, it wasn't the same with Geddy, Alex, and John back in the early 70s. Clockwork Angels Rush isn't the same as Grace Under Pressure Rush, which isn't the same as 2112 Rush.
There's this intimacy that comes from allowing your idea of a thing that you enjoy to change while still accepting it as something that you, well, accept. Folding Ideas made a whole video on this. Go watch it immediately after you're done with this one. And also, the fact that things only exist in a certain state for a period of time compels you to enjoy them while they last, sometimes. Hey, this is Jacob. I'm going to offer some unfiltered thoughts about the tour here now that it's been a couple of dates into the tour and I have seen footage on YouTube. Annika sounds really good. You know, the first couple of nights in Los Angeles, she was obviously like still getting her footing. But just the fact that, you know, she was able to learn all of these Rush songs and do like different sets each night. And obviously having fun with Geddy and Alex on stage is just so heartwarming to see. Like they're having fun exactly as they intended to do. The new logo is interesting. Taking away the man in the star and coming up with this like 3 crescent sort of thing. It feels a little generic, but also at the same time like I understand the meaning and the symbolism behind it. And it makes it really obvious that for this tour, Rush is changing their identity in a very meaningful way to still like show that they are themselves, but they are, you know, like I said, evolving to this new form. It's a form that pays a lot of respects to Neil. Like a lot of this tour basically can be seen as a dedication to Neil. And I think that's really sweet with like the interlude videos and all of that. And yeah, I don't know how they're, it boggles me how these musicians can just have the energy, especially at this age, to continue to do this for a year or 2 at a time, and they're gonna do it. They're gonna travel. It's just like any other tour that they've done. It looks great, and it's wonderful. I'm so happy for them. All of this is happening inside the Rush world itself, for the most part, and it's already changing how I see the band and my experience with it. But Rush and my idea of it does not exist in a vacuum. It also exists inside the rest of the world and my experience with that.
I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but we're losing our freedoms day by day as our wealth gets transferred to the top, more than any other point in human history. I've definitely noticed it in my own life after ignoring it or otherwise not having to focus on it for long enough. Now I'm trying to finish grad school and save for the future while also managing a job and paying rent, utilities, gas, groceries. Obviously, most people struggle with these things to an extent, but I wasn't worrying about any of these things when I was first surrounding myself with Rush and other music and video games and art and other creative pursuits that I have. You might have gathered from what I've talked about before in this video and at other points in the channel's history combined with other apparent factors about myself that I've had a relatively privileged upbringing, with plenty of space and time and resources to explore the interests that I want to explore. And now I'm forced to take care of myself and grow up in some ways much later than other Rush fans have had to do. Okay, so it's different because now I'm an adult and I've found out life isn't fair. Good job. Wrap the video up. What a stellar point to make. Obviously, it's not as simple as growing up, because I think people will be too quick to equate growing up with the idea that the world is fundamentally a bad place and things will never get better. The people who equate the two, I think, have either just given up or they have something to gain from making sure the evil people continue to win. And we're going to talk about the evil people now. A combination of oil barons and religious fanatics genuinely do not care if the planet is destroyed of all of its beauty and resources, along with killing millions of people living on it because they stand to profit in the short term. All of our world leaders are either actively encouraging or acting as dead weight to opposition to illegal and immoral wars and genocide because they either personally thrive on the hatred or are being paid very well to oversee it. Media talking heads with motives to continue enriching the wealthy have convinced enough people to attack others because of their race, sex, gender identity, religion, or immigration status, to name a few things, instead of recognizing everyone suffers under capitalism and must unite across these lines in order to win. I know that none of this is new. Like Monopoly, the same methods of play have been around for the entire game, but when you get far enough into it, the momentum really starts to carry itself. I feel we're at a point where it's genuinely almost impossible to see things actually turning around in the future, for real. More people are second-guessing the notion that things are going to get better, as more and more of us start to see the patterns in how all of these things are symptoms of a larger systemic aim to make sure, again, that all of our money and time and freedom is transferred to the people in power who stand to make the most of it. And we are currently not stopping it. Aside from rays of hope like New York City and Minneapolis, There seems to be not much of a drive in all of us for the actual collective action that's needed to take power back. So what is there left to do besides get dopamine hits from our profit-driven algorithms or develop addictions that give us at least something good to feel in the moment?
I don't know why we're so scared to do things differently when the situation is as dire as it's ever been. The inequality has never been more pronounced. We've never had more of a reason to act. Maybe it's because we all have been just drenched in the fruits of the world at the same time and are individually scared to lose the few good things that we have left to enjoy in the process of searching for a world that ought to be. Even if we don't have many good things to point to, our individual lives can always get worse. And too many of us are just too scared of the personal risk. We just don't know how to sacrifice the parts of our lives that we need to sacrifice in order to make things better. And I'm being honest with myself, I haven't set myself straight more than your average person. I'm pretty confident that I have a good read on the situation, but a good read means nothing if people don't do anything with that information. Maybe if I was more put together, I would be using my time to talk more to my neighbors and go to more community meetings, or doing more to join DSA and to help my other friends join DSA if we determine that that is a good use of our time, instead of, sitting and editing this YouTube video by myself in my bedroom on the weekends for hours on end. In a way, I think while I personally have been very lucky to have such a resurgence of all my favorite things that I've discussed in this video in just the past few years, most of them, and many more interests besides, they've also filled me with a certain type of dread because of how much they seem to threaten me with a retreat into spaces where I don't feel the responsibility to face the world. And I can feel the frustration of those watching this who have never had such a luxury to begin with, this luxury of this certain type of dread. So understandably, it's hard to be excited for Rush in the same way that I used to be. I'm not buying a ticket to a show. For one thing, I could never personally afford it. For a second, the constant feeling of needing to act on the world's problems has made it really difficult for me to figure out how to spend time enjoying much of anything, including my own art and musical pursuits, as well as friendships and personal relationships. Sometimes it's more and more difficult to justify escapes existing as a concept at all, in any capacity, as if the reality where the world's problems are acknowledged and the reality where they are not can continue to peacefully coexist by each other ever.
On October 25th and 27th, 2026, Rush will play in Washington, D.C.'s Capital One Arena, about a mile east of where the pedophiles that run the country will shout about strangers that threaten us, are immigrants and infidels, and stoke fear about strangeness too dangerous in our theaters and bookstore shelves. GTA 6 will release in a video game market where players can't play it because they're priced out of copies of the game and systems to play it on due to the whims of the billionaires flooding the space with speculative gambling and ventures into technology that ultimately serve no one but the rich. Buffalo, New York, the sports city where I currently live, will once more collectively gather this September as seemingly one population in the yearly ritual of rooting for the Bills to win the Super Bowl, doing so in a stadium they cannot afford to sit in, which carries the name of a health insurance company that lobbies against giving us the universal healthcare we need to survive. These things that we enjoy at the peak of what we're able to celebrate are sitting on collapsing foundations. It's impossible to escape, and it is unjustifiable to look away and cover our ears. Not now, not ever. Nothing will ever be the same upon revisiting it, because the truth of how it exists, how it's always existed, even if we were not awake to the injustice and inequality previously, has always been there, and we cannot unlearn the truth.
But at the end of it all, I try to remain an optimist, but it's really difficult to. I don't want to end this video with some feel-good message about how it will all work out, because there is no guarantee that the good people will always win in the end. There just is not. And I also don't want to give you the idea that you accomplished something just by watching this video, because you didn't. We are tasked with a type of work and vulnerability that most of us are not ready to do, but we still have to do it. But I do think that our interests and our hobbies and routines that we use to justify that life is worth living are actively useful in taking back what's rightfully ours. These things legitimately do bring people together, and they serve as the connection points for understanding others and seeing past the differences that we are taught to hate. They can allow us to recharge, and the idea of them can be used to drive us forward to be able to achieve eventual freedom to live how we want to live. Our interests can be tools to win if we allow them and if we balance them with action. And I want you to know that even if I don't know you, and chances are that I do not, I still have your back, and I support the effort that you make in figuring out how to join the effort in helping us free ourselves, however much you stumble along the way. Because I'm doing the same thing, and I have no intention of pretending that it's not messy for me. The only difference between you and me right now is that I took the time to make this video about the same things we're always thinking. And I'm obviously not a professional. I scrapped this together with the materials that I have because I thought that it was a good use of my time. I want your interests and your personality to be how other people meet you and appreciate you as another person so that you can form good relationships and so we can form the forces needed to set the world on a better path. So let me know what you bond with people over. Personally, in addition to Rush returning, I really like the new Backrooms movie. I'm also unexpectedly even more excited about the new Boards of Canada album, Inferno. This one just snuck up on me, as I'm sure it did a lot of other people. I see it as this new chance to introduce my friends to new music and to learn about the music that they like in return. And almost more importantly, it's an opportunity to find other people that I don't know who like what Boards of Canada does in places that I don't expect. And then that becomes a chance to draw a human connection with others and give us the grounds to say to each other, hey, I see in you myself. And in that, I understand that you fundamentally deserve freedom